2016 college debate series. This is the citizenship debate featuring Yale taking on University of La Verne and UCLA. I'll hand it off to our host, Clay Aiken, chair of the debate.
I'm not going to stand up for a second because these are the stars of the day. I'm Clay Aiken, I'm your chair, and joining me on the you know what I look like now. Joining me on the judging panel, Dan Max from Politicon, who you just met, and John Gower, also from Politicon. Opening for the government, we have the Prime Minister Xavier from Yale, who is that right there. And opening for the opposition, as the opposition leader, we have Joe Kahn from UCLA. Joining the government in its case as the Deputy Prime Minister is Justin from Yale, with the Deputy Opposition Leader Tyler from University of La Verne rebutting. They'll be followed by Xavier, again from Yale, making the case as a member of government, and Austin from UCLA responding as a member of the opposition. Then summarizing the government side, we have Justin from Yale, and summarizing the opposition side will be Caden from University of La Verne. That's correct? Correct? Everybody got that? So before we begin, just everybody remember that these teams have been assigned this topic, and they've been assigned to the side for this debate, and so their arguments shouldn't be interpreted as an endorsement of their position or of the position of their institutions that they represent. So now, without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call this House to order on the motion that this House believes that it is discriminatory for the federal government to give preferences, privileges, and services to citizens over non-citizens within our borders. I invite the Prime Minister to open the case from the government bench.
Well, just take it off.
Take it off. Ooh. Can everyone hear me? All right, so before we start, just want to say, of course, we're really honored to be invited here. We flew across half the country, or the entire country, sorry. California is amazing. It's really hot. Politicon is really cool. I'm really excited to meet. I know apparently Glenn Beck is here, who in my high school years is a bit of a muse to me, so I'm really, really excited. All right. Okay, we good? Starting time. So, in a world where apparently the United Kingdom is willing to depreciate its currency by 10% in order to make sure that immigrants from East Europe and the Middle East don't show up, we are incredibly proud to propose the motion and make sure that the millions of undocumented immigrants who currently live in America, who currently live in fear of deportation, of being taken away from their homes, taken away from their family, and their children who are actually American citizens themselves in many cases, we are so happy to be here. What are we talking about when we mean privileges, preferences, and services? As a general rule, governments, including the United States, tend to ascribe three things to the privileges of citizens that they don't for either non-citizen residents who are legal residents or undocumented immigrants who are also residents but obviously aren't legally registered and aren't citizens. One, particularly social services. While undocumented immigrants and legal immigrants do get some social services, right? For example, they may get SNAP benefits or some subsidized housing. They are all prevented from achieving Social Security, which we recognize as an incredibly important social benefit in the status quo in the United States. It's why it's such a big deal. We put an incredible amount of money into it as undocumented immigrants. That's what we'll be talking about. The second main thing is voting at the federal level and being able to choose and have representation in who's actually going to represent your beliefs. Who is going to represent you when you're going to say, for example, I don't want Trump to be my president, I would rather stay here. Finally, though, we think the main last protection is protection from the arbitrary deportation, which currently is true for all the legal, non-legal citizens or non-legal residents who are living here all across the country. So, what are we talking about? Moreover, we think we're talking about non-citizen residents, not like tourists, for example. You don't get to show up right before the election and leave. Maybe you have to stay here for 6 months to achieve some of these benefits. But we think overall that's fine. Moreover, we also want to remind you that we think that there can be no legitimate, which we mean something is discriminatory. We mean there is no legitimate, practical, or philosophical justification in a Western liberal democracy for, like America or like Europe, for actually saying, no, you get to vote. No, you get Social Security benefits and get to actually make sure that you aren't in poverty as an elderly person, but instead are subject to without those, based on an arbitrary characteristic. Like, for example, where one is born, no thanks, and where one actually is going to be spending their lives. So, we think that actually, that people would never consent to a system or a democratic process if, for example, it was discriminating on immutable characteristics, like, for example, your race, like your sexuality, like where you're born, and no one would ever want to be part of this. So we think the burden actually lies on opposition to prove to us why there is some distinction here that not only merits some actual unequal treatment, but specifically the unequal treatment that we prescribe that is consistent among Western liberal democracies and the world, like voting privileges, like Social Security benefits, and like protection from deportation. Okay, we want to now say, why do citizens get benefits? Why do people who enter in the system at all get benefits? We're going to show why there's no reason that we should distinguish based on national origin. What is that? So the main reason that people are able to vote in our system, able to get benefits, is primarily because they are subject to the coercive power of the state, right? They have to, for example, go to jail if the collective decides that they don't like them or have committed some crime. Or if they're subject to taxation, right? They still have their money taken away for the greater collective. This is true of non-citizens and citizens. So we don't see that there's actually going to be particularly important for differentiating benefits like voting or like Social Security benefits. Moreover, they also follow laws in a relatively consistent manner. I'll take you in a minute. In a relatively consistent manner. Although they have broken one law in the case of undocumented immigrants, people still actually contribute. In fact, labor force participation of immigrants and non-native citizens is actually higher than native populations within the United States. But I'll take your POI.
Yes. Now, the point they say that 6 months residency is enough to get all the rights of a citizenship, they remove any idea of naturalization, any ideas that actually make someone an American. Before they can participate in our voting system, before they can vote on who's going to represent us, they must have a vested interest in this country. That is what citizenship proves.
Yeah. So, we think that this is a pretty common argument. Like, doesn't this just weed out all the people who don't want to be Americans? So, newsflash, if you've traveled across the Mexican border, have learned a different language, and found employment in a different country, it's all for the sake of making your life better off, you clearly want to participate in the system. Moreover, a bunch of undocumented immigrants pay enormous amounts of taxation when they don't have to. Remember, the federal government, no thanks, set up in the 1990s a way for undocumented immigrants to contribute to income tax such that when there came a naturalization process like the one we're proposing today, they can have deference. People want to contribute. They want citizenship. They want to live here. We should allow them to, and not just say, no, only 3% of people get random visas, and as a consequence, people have to come over illegally in order to have a better life in their countries, so they can escape, for example, narco states like exist within the Golden Triangle of Central America right now. We think this is a really patronizing idea of national identity, and in the end, we actually create a better system where people want to enjoy American benefits and American society. Okay. We also just want to really hammer that home, the idea of how do the undocumented contribute. They contribute in actually particularly important ways, in addition to contributing the way that we normally do, like paying taxes and following most laws. And remember, undocumented immigrants actually commit violent crimes at lower rates than normal citizens and native born. We think that this is a public perception that's mostly just made because the people who come over tend to be poor, non-white males who also happen to actually be subject to a lot of discrimination, particularly within the criminal system, the status quo in the United States. So, they also do jobs that we don't want to do. They provide particular benefits as labor complements. So, what would happen, for example, if all the undocumented immigrants suddenly disappeared tomorrow? We think what would actually happen is that critical sectors and critical output in those sectors, like agriculture in particularly in the southwest United States, would literally disappear. What they would have to do as a consequence is actually raise wages so that people would take these jobs because, they're particularly harmful. Like, no one really wants to, of their own volition, hey, I'm going to go, pick plants or give agricultural products, and then subject themselves to that. Or they would have to actually just prescribe a higher wage to that, meaning there would be radically fewer jobs in this industry and lower output overall, which would really hurt us. And we think that actually there are going to be a lot of negative impacts of exactly what they were talking about in POI, which is granting non-citizens this kind of exclusion, saying, no, you don't get to take part in our system. you don't get to be a part of it at all, let alone vote for the people who are going to represent you. Vote for the people who are going to decide what crimes you have to commit in order to go to jail, or what taxes you have to pay. There are a bunch of examples of this in history. Like, for example, when in the 1940s to 50s, West Germany imported a ton of foreign workers through migrant programs, and then their children were not made natural citizens, which meant that there effectively existed into the 1970s and 80s a lot of actual discrimination based off that, and a huge feeling of exclusion. We're incredibly proud to propose. Here.
Thank the Prime Minister very much for his remarks. And now to open the case for the opposition bench, the leader of the opposition.
How's everybody doing?
Just pull it off.
Just pull it off. All right. Before I start, I would like to give a few thank yous, as is usually the case of things like this. First of all, we'd like to thank Politicon for inviting us to such an awesome event. I'd like to thank Dan Max for helping us out and getting all of this organized, making sure everything runs smoothly. Our judging panel, which we're so grateful to have, because without a judging panel, you can't really adjudicate any sort of debate, so it's just a bunch of people yelling at each other. And also, thank you, Yale, for flying out halfway across the country. We appreciate that. We appreciate your presence on the West Coast. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, the Brexit that we just witnessed roughly 4 to 5 days ago really demonstrates for us how this conversation about what citizenship is, what the nation state is, and how we're supposed to evaluate these two competing concepts, and in what ways is the intricate relationship between the nation state and the citizen something that we should really focus on for this debate. What I'm going to do is first address some of what the government team said, and then get to our case. Overarching on their case, I want to talk about how it's convenient for them that they decided only to focus on undocumented immigrants and how hard life is for them, which we think we should absolutely look at, right? But this debate is not about undocumented immigrants, and it's not about amnesty, as they so try to make it seem. What this debate is about the difference that in how a nation-state treats its citizens versus how a nation-state treats anyone who's a non-citizen. Again, this can be a visa holder, this can be a lawful permanent resident, someone with a green card, as well as an undocumented immigrant. They're all part of this discussion. We have to look at it holistically. So the first argument or the first thing that they tell us is that there are 3 fundamental differences between a citizen and a non-citizen, right? Social services, voting, and protection from arbitrary deportation. What we say is that social services largely are given out in proportionately to how much you pay into the system. Well, that's the idea, at least. Theoretically, it doesn't always work like this. But the reasoning is that if someone has only worked here for, let's say, 1 or 2 years, that they wouldn't then get a lot of social security benefits. That's based on how long you've been in the system, contributing to the system. And if that's the case, you get social security benefits. Even with undocumented immigrants, they get taxpayer identification numbers, so they're able to still pay into the system and participate in some ways. But secondly, then they talk about voting, how only citizens have the right to vote. And this is true, but it's based on the principle of reciprocity and the principle of a common interest, right? So when you're a citizen, it means that you've either become naturalized, you've given an oath of allegiance to the country, you've learned at least a little bit about our history, but secondly, if you haven't been naturalized, it means you've grown up in this country and that's what you know, meaning that you're going to have a common interest in serving the well-being of the country. With people who are non-citizens, we don't know this to be true, right? And we can talk about how, well, they do contribute, and absolutely we say they do. That's why we should work to get them to become citizens. Look, we don't have to endorse the current immigration system right now, but we can say that the citizen, by going through the process of becoming a citizen, means that they have a vested interest in the common outcome of the state, whereas a non-citizen doesn't. For example, let's say that someone lives in Mexico for more than half the year, I'll take you after this point, lives in or Mexico or Canada for half the year, then they might try to, if they were given the right to vote, they may try to influence American electoral politics, maybe to the will of one of their home country, right? So there's a dual nationality, sort of a dual allegiance going on, that with citizenship, you're able to counteract that. Yeah.
So if I was born in the United States, move to the United Kingdom and live there for most of my life, does that mean I forfeit any right to having a common interest in the place that I was born and presumably have some ties to? And if so, how is that different from an undocumented immigrant who comes here at age 2, lives here for their entire life, is subject to our laws, and wants to participate in our system?
We say that they should participate in the system and that they should become a citizen, right? So one of the striking facts is that of the 2/5 of immigrants who are actually available to be able to apply to become a citizen, only 2/5 have. So that people are not applying to become a citizen. We think that that's something we should be incentivizing. But so now we want to talk about our plan. What is it really that we're talking about? So I want to get to sort of the principle of what a citizen is, and then we're going to advocate a plan that prioritizes the rights of citizens to see if this is something that we can actually get behind realistically, apart from the theoretical. So first, on the principle of being a citizen, that there's a reciprocal relationship, right? The classic Western liberal philosophers like Rousseau and Locke tell us that the state comes together by a mutual pact of people who say that we can do things more efficiently and more effectively as a collective if we come together. And so that there are responsibilities and guarantees, that the citizen has a responsibility to the state and the state has guarantees to the citizens, like protection of the military. So it's a give and take relationship, right? But one of the most striking factors about this is the oath of allegiance that citizens take, right? So this is part of the naturalization process that says that this is the country that you owe your allegiance to, and then in response the state says, okay, we will protect you with our military, we will give you the right to vote in elections, and it proves that you have a common good in the outcome of the country. So why is this different than a non-citizen? A non-citizen has no proven residency in the country. We don't know how long they've been here, how long they plan to be here. They have not taken the oath of allegiance, meaning they could still have their allegiances to some other country and simply be here for economic reasons, which is okay too, but it means they don't have the best interests of the country at heart. There could be language barriers as well as political differences. Like if someone doesn't know what a bicameral legislative system is, that might influence whether, who they decide to vote for in an election. So because of these things and citizens not being subject to residency of, they've already taken the oath of allegiance, language barriers, political differences, these are the most suited people to be able to have the right to vote and also get certain social services. So here's what we advocate then. Our plan would be a federal threshold for college acceptance for citizens. So what this means is it's similar to what a lot of states have in place right now, where if you're in the top 10% of your class, you're guaranteed a spot in a state public school. We want to make that on the federal level. That says if you're a citizen and you're in the top 10% of your high school, then you will have a guaranteed spot in a public institution. It'll focus more on the local institution, so the closer the better to the student. But if they have to go to an institution out of state, that will be paid for by subsidized loans from the Department of Education. So it says if you're a citizen and you do well in school, you are guaranteed a spot in a public university. And the government will even help you pay for some of that. So what you have is more educated citizens with more political participation. So maybe we would be able to reform, right, or streamline our immigration process if we do something like this. But it shows that we are prioritizing the rights of citizens. Because citizens, oftentimes in this day and age, maybe the term's gone out of fashion. People don't really know what it means. But being a citizen is something much more than that. It's saying that you acknowledge that the nation state that you grow up in gives you benefits, and that you owe to something larger than yourself. And that relationship makes people better, more invested in the collective consciousness, in the outcomes of their fellow neighbor. And we think that when we allow these students to guarantee them education, we think that this means that they deserve the right to vote over non-citizens, and they also deserve social services. We are proud to oppose.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you, Opposition Leader, for his remarks. The House is now pleased to recognize the Deputy Prime Minister.
Thanks, Honorable Speaker. My name is Justin Katz. I'll be continuing the government side. And I don't know if you heard or saw what we were doing up on the stage, but we try to replicate the British Parliament as much as possible, because that's a lot of fun. So if you hear an argument that you like, you can feel free to pound. Hopefully you'll be hearing a lot of them in my speech. So I want to start off by just recognizing that one of the top Google searches before the Brexit vote was, what is the European Union? Now, my points have this weird conception of citizenship where if you're not smart enough, and if you don't have enough intimate knowledge of the workings of our system, then you ought to be denied citizenship. But at the end of the day, we don't force people who go to the polls to tell you what a bicameral legislative system is. The reason is because we do not think it is legitimate for the government to impose what are effectively potentially discriminatory and arbitrary factors for determining whether or not you are delivered certain services. At the end of the day, in a world where we grant people the rights associated with citizenship, regardless of the arbitrary distinctions about loyalty or about knowledge of the system that my opponents think are so important, then we think that we ought to grant the same rights to non-citizen residents who do the same things as citizens do. Now, with that in mind, let's talk about what my opponents actually have to demonstrate. In a Western liberal system, we ought to idealize and participate in equality most of all. We think that arbitrary distinctions are on-face suspect. That is, we generally think that we should be suspicious when the government makes a delineation between two groups based on vague characteristics like loyalty to office and things like that. We think that puts the burden on them to determine exactly what about being loyal to your country means that someone who's coming into the United States ought to be granted less rights and fewer rights than somebody who happened to be born here but doesn't have to take the oath of allegiance every year, because that would be absolutely absurd. We think that they don't give you sufficient evidence or sufficient reasoning to actually tell you why that's the case, and insofar as that's true, we do not think that this distinction is actually legitimate. Now, at the top of our case, they try to tell you that we're only focusing on undocumented immigrants. Every argument that we give you is equally applicable to non-citizen residents as well. We think that if you live in the country for a long period of time, and even if you are a legal resident, then you are still paying taxes, you are still abiding by our laws. The only distinction is you can't actually have a say in determining those laws that govern you. But then they try to tell you that, like, look, the way that our system works is you pay out you get what you pay, something proportional to what you pay into the system. They give you the example of taxpayer ID numbers for undocumented immigrants. Now, I agree, undocumented immigrants are paying into the system. What they fail to realize is that those same people who are giving money to the state to support retirement benefits don't get to enjoy those same benefits. By their own standard, that is absolutely ridiculous. Because yes, it's fine if you live in this country for a shorter period of time, and that's how we determine how every single other citizen gets these benefits. That can apply to people who are just coming in. But at the end of the day, we think that the status quo is if you are an undocumented person who's lived here for like 20 years, you get fewer benefits than a citizen who has also lived here for 20 years. And if their distinction is based on this idea of reciprocity, then their distinction is absolutely ludicrous, because that would justify giving non-citizens the exact same rights as citizens. But I'll take your view on.
You start off your case by saying that people in the EU weren't informed when they voted. Do you think that it's better or worse to have more uninformed people voting for the outcome of this country?
Look, that was a rhetorical flourish. The point is that we don't have like educational tests for whether or not you're allowed to have like any sort of right to vote and things like that. Like that was what southern states did back in the 1950s, 1940s to try to discourage certain classes of citizens from voting because they thought that they weren't contributing enough to society.
You're here.
Next argument we get is this really weird argument based on this principle of reciprocity. If you've grown up in a country, then we know that you care. And the only way that we know that you care if you weren't grown up in this country is if basically you take an arbitrary oath and say some words. Now, I think first of all, it's a little naive to think that like just saying an oath of citizenship is this paramount testament to how much you genuinely believe in like the ideals of this country. But I think second of all, it's also discriminatory because if you were born in the United States, you don't have to take that oath. If you were loyal 10 years ago, the government doesn't check up on you and figure out whether or not you're loyal now. I think that the standard is simply untenable, and therefore it constitutes an arbitrary distinction that we do not think is fair. Now next they say that like, look, we have to provide incentives for people to come into the system and actually participate in the system. Now, I think that they're a little bit confused because it's not as though undocumented immigrants who have lived here for 20 years just don't want to participate in the system and like they would come and try to be citizens, but they're just not all that into it. The reason that people are not getting citizenship is because there are barriers to citizenship. For example, even if you are allowed into this country for a certain number of years, you often have to go back to your country of origin and reapply to become a citizen. That is a massive barrier, and it means that you're discouraging people from getting the rights that they are deserving. Same thing is untrue, especially of undocumented immigrants who are afraid and hiding in the shadows because they think that if they go to a government authority and say, yo, I'm in this country illegally, are you going to give me citizenship? Then they're going to get deported. We think that at the end of the day, the barrier that they're setting up is not just saying a couple of words, but actual, much larger barriers. They can hem and haw about how we should reform our immigration system. But at the end of the day, as Xavier points out, when you've already answered their POI, when you're coming into this country, when you're giving up a lot to do so, I think that is sufficient test of your actual commitment to this country and commitment to our common future that you should be afforded those same rights. Let's go to their case. So again, they talk about this idea of reciprocal relationship. It's a give and take. You do this arbitrary oath of allegiance. I think I already dealt with those arguments. I simply don't think that that standard is going to be tenable enough for them to justify discrimination based on arbitrary characteristics like where you happen to be born, which we don't think is something intrinsic or something that people can actually change throughout their life. We also just, again, people who don't like allegiance tests for voters, we think that this is a little bit absurd. Now, first, they give you like a bunch of little, like, tiny nitpicky problems with this citizen, like with this idea. Like, first of all, they say like, we don't know how long you're in the country for, and so it's difficult to have a reciprocal relation. Now, I actually don't think that that's how we portion out rights. Like, you don't get 5 votes if you've lived here for 40 years, and only 1 vote if you've only lived here for 18 years. Like, that's simply not how we portion out rights. But second of all, if it is, like, as they pointed out, we have had since the 1990s the taxpayer identification system, which gives to a certain extent knowledge of how long you've been in the country. So if they're really, really concerned about you getting exactly back, exactly what you put in, then like there are ways around that. Now, the next argument that they get is like how there's not knowledge of the system. Again, as I already talked out, that's not a requirement for citizenship in literally any other context. The only reason they're putting it up in this context is because they don't want people who weren't born here to get these rights. Also, I think their argument about how, like, basically, if you do well in school, you should become a citizen, that's also not how citizenship works for anybody else. You don't only get to vote if you have a college degree. What that means is that on their side of the house, they're justifying putting up arbitrary barriers, and it's unclear why they're doing it. I think that at the end of the day, we should instead remove those barriers and remove the discriminatory practices that exist in our country today.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, very much for his remarks. And to continue the case for the opposition, please recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Now, the opposition side comes up here, or the proposition side, sorry, and what do they tell you? Now, they tell you that citizenship is arbitrary. They say that it doesn't matter if you take this test. Maybe this is because they really don't appreciate their citizenship, but I will tell you that it is a very important thing. Now, my parents came here as illegal immigrants when they fled from Iran during the revolution. But when they came here, it wasn't just they lived here and that was enough to get citizenship, right? When they 10 years later became citizens, it was different. It was a special occasion. Why? Because it wasn't just that you were living here. It's because you take a test. You understand the way our political machine works. You go up there, you're sworn in as a citizen of the United States with any witnesses you want to bring, and it's an occasion. At that time, you become a member of the United States of America. You become a citizen, and you are granted all the rights therein. Now, they want to tell you that that's arbitrary. Let me tell you that is not arbitrary in any way. We're going to tell you that there are very distinct benefits, and that we need to fix them. What am I going to do in this speech? First of all, I'm going to go through 5 pieces of refutation, going over their case. I will then go on to our case. I will defend what my partner has brought up, why we need to be educating our own citizens over the citizens of our countries, and then why we also, the right to participate in the criminal justice system is one of the most important rights, and why this must be prioritized for citizens. Let's go through some refutation. The first thing that they come up here and they tell you is, look, a lot of people in America are uninformed when they vote. Just like a lot of people in the UK were uninformed when they voted for Brexit. They think that's enough to just say, everyone can just be uninformed and vote. That's fine. We don't think that's the solution or the mindset. We think that, yes, there is a lot of misinformation in the public, and we think that's a big problem. But what we think the solution to that is to make sure every new person that comes in is educated. Make sure they understand the political justice system. Why is that? Because when you vote, you're not just voting whatever you feel. You're voting for the best interest of yourself as an American. We have a constitution, we have a Bill of Rights, where our government is made to achieve a certain purpose, where you must have life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, where you must be innocent until proven guilty, or it's a value to citizenship. Now, allowing anyone who's lived here for 6 months to vote takes away from that, because you don't know that they understand the way the American system works. They don't understand what Americans are. And that is not to say that everyone who's not a citizen is misinformed. And that is not to say that these people are inherently any worse. What we were saying is we guarantee these people be informed. We think this is the most important factor. And more importantly, we think we should be informing more American citizens. And that is why we proposed the model of getting more citizens into colleges, not this time. Now, what's the second refutation I want to talk to you guys about? They tell you that an oath of allegiance is just an oath. It's nothing. And yes, we agree there can be someone who does not have America's best interests in heart, but takes the oath of allegiance. but there is something that may be symbolic, but still very meaningful. Now, going through the naturalization process, which they remove because they say 6 months is enough to become a citizen, takes away that meaningful distinction, right? It takes away the fact that you are now a functioning member of the United States. The third point of refutation I'm going to talk about is the barriers to citizenship. And we are going to agree with them that it is too hard for people to become citizens of the United States. That is not this debate. This debate is whether or not citizens have inherent rights and whether they should be prioritized. We think they should, not this time. Now, what's the last thing reputation they're talking about? Is about the net plan. They say, look, 6 months is enough because you're paying your taxes, you're living here, and you should have all the rights of a citizenship. As I've stated time and time again, but I cannot stress too enough, living here is not enough to be a citizen. You must go through the naturalization process because there is something about being an American. There's something about understanding the way our system operates before you vote. This is what you get with the naturalization procedure. This is what they miss. When you become a citizen, it's not just some process where you don't get a visa. It's you take a naturalization test. You understand how the Senate, the House, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution works. You understand what it means to be an American. You have to pass that test. You're then sworn in to be a member of the United States. We think this is valuable. I'll take a few on.
So I also wish voters were more informed, then we might not have had a 10% depreciation in the pound. But just because we wish that voters were more informed, at the point where we allow people who don't understand key facts about American democracy to vote based on the fact that they're born in the United States, doesn't that make it discriminatory for people who are functionally equivalent for all the other reasons that we grant people citizenship to not have the same privileges?
No. Now, let's go on to our construction method. What am I going to first tell you about, something my partner didn't mention but I will now, is the fact that when you're a citizen, this is what we've left out in this whole front half debate, you also have one more right. Is you have the right to participate in the criminal justice system. And what is this right? Jury duty. Now, I understand most people are going to look at that not as a right, but as a hindrance. But what I'm going to tell you right now is it is a right inherently. Why? Is because when you're selected as a juror, you guarantee the constitutional rights of every citizen of the United States. The right to a fair trial by your peers. Now, it's not just a criminal matter. You aren't just going to be a juror for a criminal case. It can be a civil case on constitutionality of an amendment or of a law. What you're doing is you're directly participating in the future of this country. Now, we think having to take that naturalization procedure and having to show that you understand kind of what the American culture is like, what the American ideal is, we think this is important before you actually serve these truths. Before you can determine whether someone was guilty or not of a crime, whether a law is in the best interest of the United States, whether or not it's constitutional. We think this is something that must be prioritized. We think it is a great value and it is a great honor, even if it sometimes sucks that we have to take a day off work or we have to miss out on the hours just to participate in it. We think that's an inherent right. We think that is something that Americans must value and that must be prioritized. But now, what am I also going to say to you guys? This is the key thing. Information. Now, we agree a lot of people are uninformed. But the key is we need to be valiant American citizens and we must educate them as best we can so they can become globalized members of the society, so they can participate in the global level and make sure America has the continued prosperity that it has in this day and age. Now, how are we going to do that? That's what we brought up. That's what they failed to clash with, right, guys? Is we think that, like you have in many states, any American student, any American citizen who is in the top 10% of his or her high school class should have a guaranteed right to go to an American university. Now, why is this? We think that by putting these American citizens first, we allow to show that when you give to us, we give back to you. When you have taken that oath of allegiance, when you understand how this system works, we are going to give you an education that allows you to be a more educated member of this society. We allow to have more information as a whole, and we think this is going to stop the problem of education, or at least to help to slow it down, which they bring up. So what have I really told you here today? What has the front half of this debate told you? Whereas the proposition thinks citizenship is arbitrary and therefore should essentially be abolished, we tell you it is quite the contrary. We tell you that there is something very specific about going through a naturalization procedure and being sworn in to a citizen of the United States. We think being here for 6 months is not enough. We think before you can vote, we think before you can be on a jury, we think you should be prioritized in education. We overall believe there's something inherently valuable to being a citizen, and for that reason, we are proud to oppose.
Thank you, Deputy of the Opposition, for his remarks. And the House now recognizes the member of the government to continue the case for the government debate.
Okay, that's great. All right. So I think opposition's case at this point boils down to one argument: the idea that we want citizens to be informed. But I think Justin's POI, point of information by the way, his question, really gets at the heart of this, which is at the point at which you aren't doing this for people who are born here, who are natural citizens, even if it might be better, right? People are more informed. The average voter is more informed when they go to vote. It is discriminatory, which is all case statement. All the motion that we're talking about, what we're debating says, that it is discriminatory for this to happen. Not that it produces better outcomes for the electoral system, that people are more educated and know, for example, like who or when, who the Supreme Court justice is. One of the questions, who the Chief Justice is, one of the questions on the naturalization test. Instead, it's just whether or not you are actually born here. They make this argument at the top like, no, citizenship isn't arbitrary. So in a lot of cases, whether you are born on whichever side of the Rio Grande is totally arbitrary. We don't choose that. We don't get any say in it. But instead, we're simply born, and if we're born in Mexico, we're not a citizen. But even if I move over here at 2 years old, then I'm still not able to vote for the rest of my life. Because if I do so illegally, I'm afraid to come forward. I'm afraid to come say, hey, I want to be a citizen, because I might be arbitrarily deported. They don't give me a response to this argument. I think it's actually really damning for this side of the house, and it's a nail in the coffin. So, what do they tell us? They tell us first that they give actually that example about, hey, my grandparents came over. It's a really special occasion when they became a citizen. It might have been a special occasion because until that point when they were living here, they didn't enjoy the same rights as other American citizens. They weren't able to vote. They weren't able to put money or they weren't able to get benefits from Social Security services. And in a lot of cases where people come over and they're undocumented, they're constantly afraid that they're going to be deported, which has really, really serious effects on your health. In fact, 6 out of 10 Latinos in America are currently afraid that a family member, a friend, or someone that they know will be arbitrarily deported by the government right now. And this has really harmful effects on society. But moreover, when you create groups of people who are here and are afraid of, for example, going to the hospital, they're afraid of actually of being caught and of being deported back to their country, being separated from their family. Because after all, in a lot of cases, these children, their children are American citizens because they were born here. This means that people are a lot worse off, and by the way, make you a lot more likely to not be able to get other types of welfare benefits to make it so that you can rise out of poverty, that you can actually be a lot better off in society, contribute more. Remember, if we granted people the ability to be citizens and don't have to hide in the woodworks and hide like, for example, the fact that they live here. This means that people will be able to pay more in taxes. They'll be able to, like right now in the status quo, because you're undocumented in a lot of cases, wages and the way you're paid are just pure cash, and it actually is a lot of tax evasion. So people will be paying more income taxes. They would actually be able to contribute more if we gave them this benefit. So then they get to this main argument that's still just the thrust of their case, which is we wish citizens were smarter. We want citizens to be able to do this, to be able to take this test. So this comes down to what I talked about at the top, which is that even if this is true, it means it's discriminatory to say that some people are and some people aren't based on where they were born. Justin asked this question, they simply don't actually respond, but instead just respond with no. Like, yes, you have to warrant your argument. You have to say why you're correct, and you should no because, not just no. Okay. What do they say again? They say, once again, repeat this argument about how, hey, if you're born here, you necessarily have the country's interests at heart. There are 2 reasons why this is wrong, which we've already stated, and I think I'm really going to develop. One, you can move to the UK and for most of your life still be a citizen just by virtue if you were born here. Then come back and vote in the general election. Because of the fact that you were born here. But moreover, what is the difference between someone who was born here and that's therefore gets to be a citizen, and someone who comes over when they're 6 months old and this is all they've ever known? They've never known their home country, but they're still part of the society. They still want to be part of it, which explains why so many undocumented immigrants in the status quo do contribute to taxation, because they want to be part of this, but they're afraid of actually engaging for fear of deportation. What's up?
Yes. Now, if you really think citizenship is such a pernicious concept, do you propose we just get rid of citizenship, we just abolish it outright? It's so harmful to these people.
Yeah, so I think that what we're proposing is somewhat equivalent insofar as it grants everyone citizenship. It means that citizenship benefits aren't particular to certain citizens. So I think we need to actually just make an argument about what we're talking about is bad and not just beg the question, like, do you think this is wrong? Like, maybe that's what we're arguing. Okay, what else do they say? They make an argument at length here about jury duty and how you have to be able to be part of this, this citizenry in order to be able to engage in this. So literally every argument we've made so far applies to this. Like, if you came over here and you really want to contribute, you really want to work here, you really want to help your family by having a job and having a better life because you're afraid of narco states that you grew up in or were born in, then you probably care about the laws being applied equally. Moreover, you still have to swear on an oath if you're going to become part of jury duty. Also, just weigh this against all the benefits we provide. Sure, maybe people are a little less faithful and less willing to execute the laws when they're on jury duty, when they're 1 in 12 jurors. But then again, millions of undocumented immigrants are now healthier and happier than they are randomly afraid of being deported and separated from their families at any given moment. They're able to achieve Social Security benefits and live better, happier lives because they can achieve welfare. And they're able to actually have some say in the representation so they can prevent against discriminatory policies that are directly actually attacking them and trying to get them out of this country and de-incentivizing them from being able to work, be able to live here. So I think it's pretty clear that on all those fronts, and what they've been talking about for the last 7 minutes, actually just fall, and you should be voting for our side of the house. We also want to remind you, though, that if this means more immigration, because I think that's something like that we get as implicit, then we think that's actually like good impact, right? So one, it demonstrates that people do want to live here, right? They certainly want to be part of American society. But in addition, there are a bunch of like economic impacts. We increase productivity because we get more specialization of labor due to a larger workforce, right? This is why societies like the United States and the United Kingdom, which have 300 million people, are able to be more economically productive than like people in like Mesopotamia 30,000 years ago, or 3,000 years, somewhere between there. It means lower labor costs, right? Because now we can actually have people, like I talked about this a bit in my earlier speech, about how now, in order if we people would have to raise the cost of wages of labor and their jobs in order to pay people, because right now they complement our labor, so this actually makes it so that all Americans are a lot better off. Okay, in addition, the last thing I want to talk about is just all the safety benefits and the status quo people actually are subject to as a consequence of either their undocumented status or just being a non-citizen. And I think there's something actually philosophically really damaging about being part of a society, wanting to be part of it, right? But instead, there are barriers to doing so that create this permanence, create this field and atmosphere of exclusion to you that say, no, we don't want you to be part of this. When it's not just, for example, as they apply, and Justin talks about this as well, like, hey, they could become a citizen, they just don't want to. That's the problem. No, in a lot of cases, you have to apply for a visa. In plenty of cases, you're undocumented, who are fearful of coming forward to the government because you're afraid of being deported. So looking at the debate thus far from a holistic standpoint, I think we've really taken the cake. Really excited to hear the rest.
Thank the member of government very much for his remarks and his punctuality. And that's all time. And the House now recognizes a member of the opposition. So please from the opposition.
Sorry.
I'll assume you're setting a timer, not texting.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Hello? You ready? Alright, so what it sounds like coming out of opening government is a problem with immigration. It isn't really necessarily a problem with the motion. So what the debate is actually about is whether it's discriminatory to withhold the rights that they listed, which is voting, Social Security, and deportation. So is it the arbitrary deportation? But we're really not going to engage with that very much. My partner will bring it up a little bit, and I'll touch on it a bit, but the two main things that we're going to talk or focus on from their case and their model is the Social Security and the voting. So the government has to prove to you how that is discriminatory, and I don't think that they've done a very good job of it. And I'm going to prove to you in my case how it's not discriminatory to prefer citizens and to take care of your country's citizens before you take care of tourists and non-documented citizens and everybody else. So what me and my partner really want to do is bring this back to reality and bring this back to how this actually works and what it really looks like in the real world. So we'll take on the head that we have some uneducated citizens. We'll take on the head that national pride may not be through the roof or whatever. We'll take all of that on the head, but we reasonably and logically will prove to you as how their model doesn't necessarily have any sort of plan. So they use a lot of imagery. They're painting a very vivid picture to you as to how the world is or how the world looks, but that isn't necessarily what is going on and what is going on and how this looks and how this motion looks specifically. So I'm going to do that to you, and I'm going to do that for you in 2 points, which is what is discrimination, faith in government, and the value of citizenship. So before I get into that, I'm going to get into some quick points of rebuttal, not too many, but people aren't necessarily, the opening side of government, into the back half, they're really trying to paint this vivid picture of you that people are coming to our country for the American dream, and that's not necessarily true. When you put this on a scale of I want to escape Mexico because of the cartel violence and I don't have voting rights, I'm sure people are very okay with it's just voting rights. So people are escaping these countries and people are escaping these countries and they're assimilating into our culture. However, the assimilation process, they want to say, takes 6 months. They open their case with saying that it takes 6 months, but then have tried to clean it up and say, oh, we've been here since we were 2, citizens who have been here since they were born, citizens who have been here since shortly after they were born. That's not necessarily all that this debate is about. This debate is about a plethora of other situations and circumstances in which undocumented citizens do come into, or undocumented people do come into our country. So there is a longer list of there's a bigger picture of how immigration looks, how non-documented citizens looks, and there's more than just how they would like to paint the picture. So human rights are not being violated in our country, which is the basis of what we should be protecting and the basis that a government has to protect for non-citizens. What I'm going to talk about in my points is the role of government, and a part of that is how the role of government is not to ensure a holistic worldview. It's to ensure the national view of their country and how their citizens want to be represented. So, moving on from my points of rebuttal, I might have some interwoven in, but going on to my first point, which is how this is specifically not discrimination. So to put this into a very simple mind frame, basically, it's like when you have a medical kidney list, in our medical kidney list, we have set the precedent that we would prefer to give kidney donations to a person who is a non-smoker over someone who has chose to destroy their kidney. That does not necessarily mean that we deny people, but the important distinction is preference. Not necessarily. The important distinction is preference, and that's what sets this apart from discrimination. What sets this apart from discrimination is that preference to citizens doesn't necessarily mean that we are denying all rights from other non-citizens. So we accept that we have basic human rights to uphold in our country for citizens and non-citizens, and we do. And the three things that they brought up are matters of national security, it's more logistic than they have engaged with, really. So they have come up with a lot of what they would like to do. However, they haven't shown you a clear plan as to how this would work specifically. So, moving on to my next point, which is probably the biggest point, which is faith in government and the value of citizenship. So top half of opposition really touched on this, but we're going to elaborate on it a little more. So before I do that, I want to talk about, in the first part, which is faith in government, the basic functions of government. So a few of the basic functions of government are to form a more perfect union, to ensure domestic tranquility, and to promote general welfare. Everybody in our country is protected under laws or human rights laws that don't allow us to violate certain things that are violated in other countries, which is why people are coming here in the first place. We are taking care of all of the concerns that are basic human need concerns, and we will take on the head that people are not allowed to do something, but the distinction is important, and that's what we're going to talk about right now, which is the value of citizenship. So the value of the value and the clear distinction of citizenship. So we had I'll take you after this point. So the opening opposition really talked about the principal debate of what a citizen is, but what we want to extend on is how citizenship, regardless of how government wants to depict it, is something that is very it's important to people. So regardless of how much they want to engage with that, there is a moral precedent set for citizenship. People in our country learn about citizenship in 3rd grade, something a natural citizen who has been here in this country since they were born would know. I can pick up something about the Supreme Court, I can pick up something about politics, I can go to Politicon, but somebody who is an undocumented citizen, someone who's just traveling to this country, someone who's been here for 6 months, doesn't necessarily have that type of respect or responsibility for the country. Respect or responsibility for the country and what you were supposed to do to uphold that. So before I continue my point, I'll take your line.
Yeah, so the Declaration of Independence has a lot of flowery language about a better union. But at its core, it's about democratic systems. How can we be sure we aren't actually violating these people's human rights? By the way, protection of arbitrary deportation is one of, without their access to vote and be engaged in the representative system.
So the government wants to talk a lot about arbitrary deportation, which actually doesn't happen that often, and a lot of the times that deportation does occur is a very, very good reason. And the difference between what they're saying now and what they said before is, can I just finish this point? The difference between what they were saying now and what they're saying before is that before they were saying that deportation is something that they fear. It doesn't necessarily happen. And that is the unique distinction that you guys need to remember, which is that the fear of deportation is not necessarily deportation. And if you have a problem with immigration, the immigration needs to be reformed. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the system that we have in place is discriminatory, which is what they have to prove on their side of the house.
Thank the member of the opposition very much for her remarks. The House is pleased to recognize the government whip to summarize the debate for the government side.
Thanks, Honorable Speaker. So, I think what we hear all up and down opposition bench is this weird world where they redefine conceptions of citizenship based on what they arbitrarily believe are what citizens should embolden. So, in their world, we should deny citizenship to people who, one, didn't go to college because they haven't been apportioned certain rights, to two, people who don't know who John Roberts is because they aren't educated enough to make reasoned decisions about how the system works. They would deny it to people who were born in the United States but went to Britain when they were 3 months old because apparently those people don't have enough faith and trust in the American system and they don't embody what the Declaration of Independence is talking about. We think that they would deny citizenship to people who don't work because they don't contribute to society enough in the reciprocal contract that apparently is the reason that we guarantee people these fundamental rights. They would deny citizenship to people who don't love their country if they don't take this random oath of office every 6 months or whatever they're talking about. They would deny citizenship for people who go to metal concerts and say that we should fight the machine. We think that at the end of the day, at the point where we give citizenship to those people, and those people are violating all the things that we say are reason to deny resident individuals who are living in the United States citizenship, then we think that their distinction is arbitrary, their distinction has no rational foundation, and even if we would prefer a world in which we abolish everyone's citizenship and force them to essentially take some sort of educational test in order to vote, that doesn't mean that the current system, which we are debating about, is not discriminatory. So let's summarize our point of view. What we've told you is that a law or a system treated by government is discriminatory if it makes differentiations between different groups based on arbitrary characteristics. What is the reason we grant all of those people that they say should be denied citizenship in the status quo? We grant those people citizenship because, one, have shown at least some sort of cursory commitment to living in the country. Two, because they contribute to society in certain ways. And three, because they subject themselves to the coercive power of the state, and therefore they ought to be afforded certain other privileges. Now, it's great that they should say citizenship should mean that you love your country. Citizenship should mean that you know everything about how our process works. But at the end of the day, when we grant citizenship in the status quo to people for whom that is not true, that means that other people who check all the other boxes associated with granting people citizenship status should get that status as well, and any other distinction is arbitrary. We think that at the end of the day, they had the burden to demonstrate why we give people citizenship who were born in the United States and moved after 6 months who have never been back, but we don't give citizenship to undocumented immigrants who have been here for 20 years paying taxes. We don't think they fulfilled that burden, besides getting up here Ted Cruz style and saying a lot of vague pronouncements about why America is great and why you have to love your country. What did we hear from the closing bench? Now, they focused on a couple of things. They first of all focused on Social Security, and they made this weird analogy to why you choose to smoke, and therefore that means that you don't deserve a kidney or something like that. Now, I think that's a little absurd, because first of all, you choose to come to this country, so if we say you should get citizenship after 6 months, then someone is choosing to come to the country and getting those rights. But second of all, that's just not how citizenship is apportioned, right? In the status quo, you don't choose to be born here. I wasn't sitting in my mom's womb and being I'm going to go to North Carolina, I don't want to go to, Belarus or something like that. We think that at the end of the day, insofar as we allow people, essentially give them these rights based on things that they don't choose, that means that that's not the way we apportion citizenship, and therefore forcing people who didn't happen to be born here to choose to come to the United States and saying that that is some standard for why we grant citizenship is simply absurd. Now next they say of course we want people to be able to escape countries, of course we want people to essentially be able to get out of bad situations and come to the United States, but that's not everyone. Now, our argument is that if you're coming to the United States, it's not all that easy. And if you're coming to the United States, that's probably because you want to be here. And insofar as that's true, again, if we're choosing to come to this country, you are making that commitment with your feet instead of just with your hands. And I'll take your, I'm sorry, mouth. Yeah, I'll take your PY.
Yes. Now, at the point where the government's duty is to protect the people from threats, do you not believe that they should at least do as best they can to make sure that people who are coming to this country, people who are going to vote for the future of that government, have the best interests of those people at heart, that they have the true minds of the American before they go in and they determine how our political machine changes?
So you should have made that argument at the outset, but I'll give a couple of cursory responses to it now. The first response is that it's fine because if you are like somebody who is incredibly dangerous, well, so first of all, it's just not how it works in the status quo because like we don't deport people who commit crimes, right? Like you don't lose your citizenship status if the government decides that you're dangerous. So that's just like completely ridiculous argument. But second of all, like I think that our arguments are not incompatible with governments who essentially have certain sovereign borders, putting up like certain barriers to entrance. We think that it's okay if people who are in the country basically decide like, okay, we don't want people who are super, super dangerous to be in the country. We think that that's not inconsistent with our arguments because those are essentially arguments about sovereignty. They're not arguments about fundamental rights once you're already subject to the laws of a country in which you're living. But I'll do a little more on that later. Now, next they try to tell us like, look, we have no plan on how to implement it. We're not implementing anything. We're just pointing out a statement of fact, which is that current immigration systems discriminatorily differentiate between citizens and non-citizens. That was the question. We can talk about how you like bring people out from the shadows, but that's relevant to this round. Next they say that like there are certain basic functions of government. We should be protecting our people. I think that's what the point of information was getting at a little bit here. Now, I think that they're ignoring the framework that we established from the very beginning of the round, which is that the reason we grant citizenship is because when you live within a certain country's borders, you are subject to the power of that state. You lose certain rights. You can't just do whatever you want because the government will essentially put you in jail or say that you are doing something illegal. When you sacrifice some of your autonomy, the government has to give something back, or else there is no reason that somebody would consent to living in such a system. What the government gives back is citizenship. And insofar as that is the case, we think that if you are living in a country subject to our laws, then you deserve certain rights. That's why we don't revoke citizenship from people who are thrown in jail, because they are being subject to the coercive power of the state. Now, last argument we get is like, basically right now, people aren't getting deported that much. Now, first of all, again, not true. Supreme Court just struck down Obama's decree, which was like, we're not going to deport that many illegal immigrants. But I think second of all, that misses the point, because the point is that not that you're like currently being deported or you might be deported in the future, but that you have no right against deportation, which is what citizens enjoy. So therefore, you're making a distinction. I don't have to worry about deportation because I happen to be born here. Somebody who came here when they were 6 months old does have to worry about deportation if they came here illegally. We think that fundamental distinction is absolutely arbitrary, has no philosophical or pragmatic justification, and therefore should not or is discriminatory because it is a differentiation based on arbitrary characteristics. So at the end of the day, we think that they haven't given you any arguments besides proud assertions of the strength of the American system, and we think that on our side of the house, we are upholding human rights and making sure that everybody is given the fundamental human dignity that they deserve.
Thank you to the speaker and the government for their presentation of their side, and now we will recognize the final speaker of the debate, summarize the opposition, as well as the entire round today, the opposition will.
We good? Yeah. All right. So the first thing I found extremely shocking in this debate is how the government managed to go through the entirety of the debate until their last two speeches without even discussing the role of government, right? What we need to realize in the debate today is that when it comes to citizenship and what the value of citizenship is that the role of government is very important, right? The role of our government is that they are obligated to take care of the people that are born within their borders and to take care of the citizens within our borders. When it comes to having people come in from other places, their obligation isn't 100% to take care of those people, right? We have to establish that those people are going to be a positive contribution to our society. So yes, we take on the head and we accept the fact that our voters are uninformed and may not care about America. The fact of the matter is that for all practical purposes, the U.S. government is stuck with those people. We can't do anything about it. In this debate, that is, right? When it comes to accepting people from outside the country, adding to our population, adding to our burden of what the government is paying for, right, in terms of services, we want to make damn sure that those people do care about America and that those people are educated, because to purposely add people who don't care about those things is absurd. And it's basically a burden that you're not getting any sort of benefit out of. So that's why we really need to talk about the role of government in the debate today. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so you say that we're stuck with the people within our borders. We could always just deport people who are born here. So why is the purpose of the government to protect the people that we're stuck with, instead of essentially to grant certain rights to the people who are subject to the coercive power of the state, which has been our standard since Xavier got up here at the very beginning of the round?
Right, so when we talk about the idea of deportation. I'm glad you brought me into that, right? When you're talking about deportation, first off, we brought up the idea that it's not necessarily happening on this grand scale that they're talking about, but furthermore, even if you aren't a citizen here, you don't have to worry about deportation if you're behaving like a citizen who follows laws, right? The only difference is that a citizen will go to jail for breaking laws, and non-citizens kicked out of the country, right? Follow the damn law, and deportation is not an issue. They bring up a non-issue, please sit down. So basically what we're finding is that the deportation argument on their case isn't really this grand harm that they're talking about. The fear in and of itself is like philosophical at best, and they try to run a plan text, right? So it doesn't really necessarily matter. Now, what we need to talk about, right, the main winning point of their side is the idea that, the birthplace is arbitrary. Please sit down. The birthplace is arbitrary, and it doesn't matter. We shouldn't grant people rights because of that. But what I bring to you is that it's not that we're, saying we like these people so much better because they were born here. We're saying the role of our government is to take care of those people because they are born here, because they live here, because they're citizens. Furthermore, what my partner brings up, which they haven't really talked about much, which is nice, I guess, is the idea that citizenship in and of itself has value for the government, right? When a citizen realizes that being a citizen matters, when there are benefits that they have that non-citizens don't, when they realize that the concept of being a citizen is relevant, right? That's faith in your government, that's support for your government. That's a very important thing, because what my partner brought up and what I'm going to expand on is the idea that when you don't have that value of citizenship, you have governments that are either A, autocracies and ruling over the people, or governments that are completely unstable because they can't rule over the people. If people do not feel value in their nation, value in what citizenship is, then you don't have a functioning system, something that they seem to think doesn't actually exist, right? A functioning system. Yes.
Yeah, so I know you didn't want me to ask this question, but you said that the fundamental role of government is to protect the rights of people who happen to be born here.
Yeah.
Why?
Because practically speaking, there isn't an alternative, right? Like, what are they going to do instead? Who cares about why? That's the fact of the matter. That's what our government does. That's what they're sworn to do. That's what they tell us that we do. That's what we demand of them as voters, right? To take care of the people born within our country, right? So now when we talk about the idea of, on their case, you'd like to talk about what happens when you grant citizenship to other people, right? And honestly, that's non-topical. We don't need to engage with that very much because we're not talking in this debate about a plan of let's grant citizenship to a bunch of people or let's not grant it to people. We're talking about what the value of citizenship means. And that's what's unique in our case today. My partner and I bring to you the value debate because what we've seen realistically so far is they talk about all the good things that happen when we make undocumented workers citizens and all the bad things that happen when you don't and what happens when you deport them. But realistically, we haven't heard enough of them about the value of these non-citizens, right? Or why it's bad to be a citizen necessarily, right? We're talking about the value there, but I'll take one more question. Sure.
I would love to.
Let's go for it.
You told us there's no practical alternative to helping people to just not helping people who are exclusively born here. Why don't you do the practical alternative, which is literally our side, giving undocumented immigrants the right to vote, social security, and protection from arbitrary deportation? Seems practical enough.
Because this isn't a planned debate about granting citizenship and amnesty, it's a value debate where we're supposed to be discussing what the value of citizenship means and what it is, right, and why people want it. Now, another thing they talk about people coming into our country basically because they want to partake in our system. They want to be accepted into our society. They want to be part of the American system, the American lifestyle, sure. That's not necessarily true, right? They're aware of, right? Isn't coming here because they want to be part of the American system. It's because it's, not as bad as Mexico, right? We can't guarantee that just because they're fleeing from cartel violence, that they really give a damn about the American lifestyle and about American values. And realistically, until they give you some sort of proof, actually they can't, sorry. They haven't given you any proof that there is any societal acceptance or any nationalism there, then it's a non-argument, right? There is no nationalism guaranteed on their end because realistically what I see is people coming here because it's practical, because it's better than Mexico. Not because they love America, not because they're nationalistic. And to be perfectly honest, when it comes to denying non-citizens the right to vote, I'm going to tell you that the main people they're talking about, illegal immigrants, right, aren't coming here because they want to vote against Trump. They're not showing up so they can vote. They're not showing up and thinking, wow, I can't vote, I guess I better go back. No, they're not coming here for citizens' rights. They're coming here because in their current country, they're being denied basic human rights, which they are getting and then some by coming here. If they choose to become citizens later, that's fantastic. And that's another thing. They talk about undocumented people who lived here their entire lives, right? The whole idea of, I came here when I was 2, I'm still not a citizen. Where? They can become a citizen. They have that option. They haven't told you a single time yet why they can't do that, or haven't explained to you why so many people are choosing not to. The reason being is that the rights that a citizen gets are not fundamental human rights, they're excess, right? It's things like voting, it's things like social security, which, by the way, undocumented workers aren't necessarily paying into, which is why they don't have it. So we're talking about the idea that citizenship rights are not human rights. It's not like people are coming here because they want to be that no one comes into America illegally because they want citizens' rights. That's not how it works. They come here because of the fact that they're being denied basic human rights and protections and, a safe lifestyle, and that's what we provide to them, and then some. Which, by the way, you could also argue our government's not obligated to do. But we do those things, right? The only thing that we deny them is the right to citizenship, and we do so in the name of protecting what citizenship means. Because what citizenship is a tangible benefit from our government in that our people believe in our government, at least partially speaking, because of the value of citizenship. Furthermore, what we see is that because we're solving the issues that people come here illegally for anyway, which is being denied basic human rights, that we don't need to give them citizenship, and because they haven't proven to you why uniquely citizenship rights is such a fantastic thing and why it's such a harmful thing to deny to non-citizens, we proudly oppose the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to wait on the order for a second, but I wanted to start with a few thoughts. I think for me, you guys had a very difficult argument. For me, it was a tougher one to prepare for, and I'm incredibly impressed that you did. So you had a lot of facts, a lot of stats, a lot of details. There were a few times that I got lost because you speak really quickly. Yeah. And you get very passionate, and sometimes when you speak so fast, I can't follow your argument. So that was a struggle for me. You guys had a little bit of a challenge, I think, because you didn't get to rebut after you made your points, which was difficult. I appreciate the fact that you actually continued to listen and still made some POIs while you were doing that, and stylistically, I appreciated it. I think really great arguments over here. My one thought was it felt a little bit like some of the points you had to make you might have thought of yesterday as you were preparing, and then tried to figure out how to make them fit into what they were saying instead of necessarily specifically responding to exactly what they were saying. But I loved the relatability that you had, which I'm very big on stylistic stuff. So for me, I'm always about who not only, I'm a Democrat, people know that. I think Hillary Clinton is one of the most prepared people in the country for president. But if she loses, it'll probably be because people don't like her, and not because she's not qualified. And I think that's really important when you're debating, to make sure that not only are you making your points, not only are you getting all the facts across, but you're also doing it in a way that makes me want to, if I'm a jury, if you're going to be attorneys, if I'm a jury, I want to vote, I want to side with your client, because you're the face, and if I don't like you, your client's screwed. Or if you're a politician, which some of you might want to be, many of you could very easily be, then I want to vote for you because I like you. So stylistically, that's important to me. I think Dan has some thoughts on arguments.
Oh yeah, just in the course of one thing, at least from the UCLA and University of La Verne, I wish you guys had gone a little more into national security. I think that's probably something that could have tied in, talking about how taking up arms to defend your fellow citizen, sharing the same values when it comes to that, that might have been an area for discussion. Then with Yale, we also thought one of your strongest arguments was that the 6 months and being born here, if you're born here and then you leave in 6 months, you're a citizen. If you come back in 50, versus if you are abroad and then come back in. But then to you guys, something that I really liked and thought was great was the discussion of how citizenship is about defending human rights and focusing on we still protect the human rights of the citizens in our borders. It would be nice, I think, on both sides, maybe you could have attacked them, I think, on a fluctuating voter pool. Because hypothetically, as we do move into, high-tech transport times, it could be that you have a population of 20 or 30 million people being highly mobile, almost like in the EU until a few days ago. So, that could really change the way governance works. And I think, too, going into more the Constitution and the founding of the country, kind of fun, too. They were citizens when they founded it. So, and then I guess I'll give back to Clay to announce the verdict, and we'll take some questions.
So we, on its face, you all had great facts. You all had good points. Obviously what Dan said, we all sort of agreed. There were places that you could have grabbed a few other things. Overall, for facts, I think you all did a wonderful job. Stylistically, I think you all had incredible strengths too. But for this debate, we are giving it to UCLA.
but wonderful for everyone. And if you had questions, we've got a few minutes. No? Oh, but we'll talk to you, but we'll be around.
Okay, yeah, we can take questions after.
Give him another round of applause, please.
Hold on a second, we're going to do 2 shots.
I called that.
Really?
Oh yeah, easy.
Yeah.
Your second speaker had convinced them right away.
Yeah, well, I think the banner heard him.
That's good.
Yeah.
I had your team right away.
Thank you for the feedback.